You knew. You knew the whole time. And you said nothing. Walter did not flinch. Yes. That was all he said. One word. No argument. No defense. Just a man who had been holding something heavy for a very long time and had grown used to the weight. His name was Walter Aldermere, the 6th Duke of Aldermere, a man the whole of England had decided was a villain. They said he had ruined a young woman, that he had used her, disgraced her, and walked away without a single consequence because his title protected him. They said he was exactly the kind of man that wealth and rank produce, a man with no conscience and no shame. Society closed its doors to him. His name disappeared from invitation lists. People he had known his entire life passed him in the street without a word. For 7 years, he lived in that silence, and he let it happen. He never corrected the story, never explained himself, never asked anyone to believe something different. Most people took that silence as guilt. Cecily Wyndham took it as a question. She had not come to Bath to investigate a duke. She was a scholar. She had come for access to a private library, old land records that no one else had bothered to look at in 40 years. The duke owned them, so she wrote to him. He wrote back. That surprised her. A man not received by anyone in society had replied to her letter within 2 days. She filed that away in her mind and said nothing about it. She went to Aldermere House. She worked in the library. She kept to herself. And then one afternoon, between 2 old land surveys that had no business being filed together, she found them. Letters. Old letters. Written by the very woman whose name had destroyed Walter's reputation. Written after she had already left Bath. Written to him. They were not what Cecily expected. They were not the letters of a woman who had been wronged. She read them once, then again. Then she sat very still for a long time. Then she went to find Walter. That is the moment you heard at the start of this story. You knew. You knew the whole time. And you said nothing. Yes, he had known. He had always known. And he had chosen, deliberately, quietly, at enormous personal cost, to say nothing. Why would a man do that? Why would anyone hand over 7 years of their life, their name, their place in the world, for a truth that was never even theirs to carry? Stay, because the answer will surprise you. There is a concept in Japanese tradition called giri. It has no perfect translation in English. It means a duty so deep, so serious, that a person will carry it even when it costs them everything, even when no one is watching, and no one will ever know. Walter Aldermere had never heard that word, but for 7 years he had lived every single day inside its meaning. To understand what Walter did and why he did it, you need to know where this story started. 7 years ago, Bath was talking. That is how it always started in England in 1810. Not with a courtroom, not with evidence, with talk. A whisper at one end of a drawing room that reached the other end louder than it began. A young lady had left Bath without warning. No farewell, no explanation. She was simply gone, and the name people attached to her departure was Walter Aldermere. Nobody asked him directly. That was not how things worked. In the world of the British peerage, a duke sat at the very top of the social order, second only to the royal family itself. There were 5 ranks: Duke, Marquis, Earl, Viscount, Baron. Walter held the highest. His word should have carried the most weight in any room he entered. It counted for nothing. Here is something worth knowing. In Regency England, when a person of high rank lost the favor of society, legal scholars had a term for it borrowed from the French, mort civile, civil death. The person was still breathing, still walking, still holding their title, but in the eyes of everyone that mattered, they had ceased to exist. No charges were ever brought against Walter. No court ever heard his name. Just whisper and repetition, and that was enough. Invitations stopped arriving. Staff gave notice and left quietly. His house in Bath, once full of movement, went still. He stopped attending assemblies not because he was barred, but because he understood, very clearly, that he was no longer welcome. He said nothing to correct any of it. This is worth pausing on, because this is where most people make their first mistake about Walter Aldermere. They see a guilty man staying quiet. They do not consider that an innocent man might also stay quiet, for reasons that have nothing to do with guilt. Pay attention to that. When a whole community turns against one person and nobody stops to ask questions, that is not justice at work. That is a crowd that has found its target and stopped thinking. Punishment without investigation is not fairness. It never has been. 7 years passed. Then Cecily Wyndham wrote him a letter. She was a scholar, methodical, precise, not easily impressed by titles or reputations. She needed access to the private library at Aldermere House, specifically the medieval land surveys of Somerset that had sat untouched in his collection for decades. She was not interested in the Duke. She was interested in the documents. He replied within 2 days. They met once. Briefly, he made her an offer that was plain and without sentiment. She could use the library for as long as her work required. In return, she would accompany his ward, a girl of 14 named Elodie, newly arrived from Edinburgh, to the weekly social assemblies. Walter could not take her himself. He was not received. But a lady of standing could open those doors for Elodie where he could not. Cecily agreed. It was a fair exchange. Nothing more. She thought she understood exactly what she had walked into. Walter agreed to the arrangement without hesitation. Almost too quickly, if she had been paying attention. He did not negotiate, did not add conditions, did not seem to weigh it up at all. He simply said yes, like a man who had already been waiting for exactly this. Cecily thought she understood the deal. She did not yet understand the man. The library at Aldermere House was exactly what Cecily had hoped for. Floor-to-ceiling shelves. Decades of documents, some properly filed, some not. She came every morning and stayed until the light went. She was not there to look at Walter. She was not there to form opinions about him. She was there to work. She worked. But careful people notice things even when they are not looking for them. She noticed that the one remaining footman addressed Walter with more warmth than formality. She noticed that Elodie, 14, restless, too clever for drawing-room small talk, followed Walter around the house the way a person follows someone they feel genuinely safe with. She noticed that the books on his private desk were not decorative. They were read, heavily, the kind of reading a person does when they are alone most of the time and books are the main company. None of this proved anything. She filed it away and kept working. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, it happened. Between two land surveys dated 1763 and 1764, surveys that had no reason to be together, misfiled probably decades ago, she found a small bundle of letters, folded, tied loosely, old enough that the paper had softened at the edges. She untied them. They were written by a woman. The handwriting was careful at first, then more urgent as the pages went on. And they were written to Walter, dated 7 years ago, written after the young lady had already left Bath. Cecily read the first one slowly. Then she stopped, because these were not the words of a woman who had been wronged by the man she was writing to. They were apologies, careful, detailed apologies, explaining that she had allowed people to believe something that was not true, that she had not corrected the story because correcting it would have cost someone else something she could not bring herself to take from them, that she was sorry for what it had cost Walter, that she hoped one day he would understand why she had made the choice she had. One name appeared in the letters repeatedly, the name of the person she had been protecting, but the ink over that name had been smeared. Deliberately. Someone had gone back through these letters at some point and made that one name unreadable. Cecily sat with the letters for a long time. Then she went to find Walter. She did not go with anger. She went with a direct question, the way she approached everything. These letters, you have read them. Yes, you knew what she wrote. You knew she was not telling the truth about you. And you still said nothing to anyone. Yes. Why? It was not even a question the way she said it. It was a space she left open for him to fill if he chose to. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said it plainly, the way a person states a fact they have long since made peace with. Because correcting it would have destroyed someone who did not deserve to be destroyed. That was all. No speech. No drama. Just a man who had made a decision 7 years ago and had been living quietly inside it ever since. Here is something that history does not talk about enough. In Ottoman Turkish law, there was a concept called iftira. It meant a deliberate false accusation, a lie told specifically to destroy a person's standing and honor. The Ottoman legal system took it seriously enough that if a person was proven to have made iftira against another, the punishment that would have fallen on the accused was turned instead on the accuser. It was a legal mechanism built on a simple idea, that a lie told to ruin someone is itself a crime. England in 1810 had no such thing. A rumor had no official weight and no official correction. Once it was moving, it simply kept moving until people forgot it or found something new to talk about. There was no court, no process, no moment where a person could stand up and say, "This is false, and here is the proof." Walter had no path back. The story about him had become the truth, simply because enough people had repeated it enough times. Walter did not seem angry about this. That was the thing Cecily kept returning to. He was not bitter. He was not performing patience. He was simply settled, like a man who had accepted the shape of his life a long time ago and had stopped fighting its edges. Watch for that in people. When someone has absorbed an injustice with too much calm, not the calm of a person who is healed, but the calm of a person who made a decision that the world knows nothing about. That stillness means something. It is not emptiness. It is weight, carried so long it has stopped feeling like a burden and started feeling like just the way things are. The obscured name in those letters sat in her mind like an unfinished sentence. Who was it? Why had someone smeared the ink? And did that person, whoever they were, have any idea what Walter had given up to keep their name clean? Cecily had one name left to find, and when she found it, everything changed. It was not Cecily who found the name. It was Elodie, 14 years old, curious about everything, and completely unaware that some doors are closed for reasons that matter. She had wandered into the library one afternoon while Cecily was sorting through a separate set of documents. She picked up one of the letters. She held it to the tall window where the afternoon light came in strongest, and she read the name aloud. Lord Hargrove. Cecily went still. Elodie set the letter down and wandered back out of the room the way she had wandered in. Easily, without weight, already thinking about something else entirely. She had no idea what she had just done. Cecily stood at the window for a long time after she left. Lord Hargrove. She knew that name. Everyone in Bath knew that name. Lord Hargrove was perhaps the most admired man in the city. His portrait hung in the Guildhall. He had funded the new wing of the hospital that had served over 300 families in the past 4 years alone. He sat on 3 charitable committees. He was spoken of the way people speak of someone they have decided is simply good, without question, without examination, as a fixed point everyone agrees on. 7 years ago, Lord Hargrove had been engaged to the young lady who left Bath. Cecily read the letters again, carefully this time, with the name no longer missing. The letters did not say exactly what Lord Hargrove had done, but they said enough. He had done something the young lady had felt she could not expose without destroying a man she still, in some complicated way, cared about protecting. So she had left, and she had allowed the story about Walter to fill the space her leaving created. And Walter, knowing all of this, had said nothing. Not to protect Lord Hargrove, who he owed nothing, but to protect her choice. Because she had made it, and it was hers, and he had respected it even at the cost of his own name. Lord Hargrove did not know any of this. That was the part that stayed with Cecily longest. The man whose reputation Walter had quietly, unknowingly shielded for 7 years had no idea the shield existed. He had gone on with his life, built his charitable work, become admired, while Walter's house went quiet and his invitations stopped, and the whole of Bath decided who he was based on a story nobody had ever actually verified. She sat with all of this for 3 days. She thought about what it would mean to tell Lord Hargrove the truth. She thought about the hospital wing, the 300 families, the committees, the work that had genuinely helped people who had nothing to do with any of this. She thought about Walter, about 7 years, about a man who had never once, in all that time, asked for anything back. On the 3rd day, she went to find him. He was in the library. He did not look up immediately when she came in. He was reading, actually reading, not performing it, and he finished the sentence before he closed the book. That small detail said everything about him that she had spent weeks observing piece by piece. "I am not going to tell him," she said. Walter looked up. He did not say thank you. Not straight away. What he said was quieter than that, and more honest. "You ought to." "I know," she said. "I am choosing not to." He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that is not about the words just spoken, but about the person who spoke them. Here is where this story connects to something real. In the tradition of the Japanese samurai, there was a concept called giri. You heard that word in the opening of this story. But here is the fuller picture. Giri was not simply duty in the way English speakers understand the word. It was an obligation that sat above personal comfort, above pride, above the desire to be understood or recognized. A samurai who carried disgrace on behalf of another was not seen as a fool. He was seen as the most honorable person in the room, because he understood completely that his own standing mattered less than the thing he was protecting. He did not need an audience. He did not need acknowledgement. The act was its own completeness. Walter Aldermere had never read about giri. He had never sat in a room where anyone discussed it. But for 7 years, without a word for it, he had lived it entirely. This is not as rare in history as people assume. Historians studying Victorian England have found documented cases of younger sons in aristocratic families who quietly accepted public blame. For debt, for scandal, for decisions made by older brothers, specifically to preserve the family name and the elder son's inheritance. It was never written into law. It was never spoken about openly. It was simply understood by certain people that some costs are paid in silence, that some sacrifices leave no record. Cecily's decision not to expose Lord Hargrove was not weakness. It was not even forgiveness. She had not forgiven him. She did not know him well enough to forgive him anything. It was a considered judgment. Destroying what he had built would not give Walter back one single day of the 7 years he had lost. The 300 families who had used that hospital wing had done nothing wrong. The truth, in this case, was something she could hold privately without needing to use it as a weapon. Some truths do not need to be announced to matter. Sometimes knowing is enough. The arrangement between them had started as a transaction. A library for a chaperone. Documents in exchange for respectability. It was not that anymore. Neither of them said so. Neither of them needed to. The secret was no longer a secret between them. And that changed what came next. The Tun did not suddenly open its doors to Walter Aldermere. That is not what happened. This is not that kind of story. There was no grand moment where Bath society gathered and admitted it had been wrong. There was no public apology. No announcement, no ceremony. What happened was quieter than that, and in many ways more meaningful. 3 weeks after Cecily's conversation with Walter in the library, a letter arrived at Aldermere House. It was from a retired admiral, a man in his 70s who had known Walter's father and who had privately never been fully comfortable with the story the town had settled on. He had not said so publicly, but he wrote now, briefly, a short letter, nothing dramatic. He simply asked after Walter's health and mentioned he would be glad to receive him for dinner at his convenience. It was one letter, from one old man. Walter read it twice, folded it carefully, and set it on his desk. 2 weeks after that, a calling card arrived from a local magistrate whose daughter Elodie had befriended at the assemblies. The card was left in the correct manner, in the correct place, with no note attached. In the language of 1810 England, the meaning of a calling card left without a negative response was simple and clear. You are recognized. You are welcome. Small things. But understand what small things meant in that world. Society in Regency England did not shift the way water shifts. All at once, in every direction. It moved the way a large ship turns. Slowly, 1 degree at a time. Those 2 small gestures, 1 letter, 1 card, were the first degrees of a turn that had not happened in 7 years. Elodie noticed. She said nothing to Walter directly, because she was 14 and had already learned, in the way children who have been through difficult things learn, to be careful with hope. But she sat at dinner that evening with her shoulders slightly less tight than usual. Cecily noticed that too. One evening, not long after, Cecily and Walter were in the library at the same time. Not by arrangement. She was finishing the last of her Somerset surveys. He was writing correspondence at the far desk. They had grown used to the same room by then, comfortable with the particular silence of 2 people who do not need to fill every moment with words. She asked him, without planning to, what she had been thinking about for some time. You said once that you would make the same choice again. Do you still mean that? He did not answer immediately. He set down his pen. He looked at the window for a moment. I used to think reputation was everything, he said. That once it was gone, nothing remained worth protecting. And now, she said, reputation is what others say about you. Character is what you do when no one is watching. I lost one. I kept the other. He paused. I would choose the same again. Cecily sat with that. She had come to Aldermere House for medieval land surveys of Somerset. She had found those. Her work was nearly complete. She had what she came for. But she had also found something she had not come looking for, and had not known she was missing. The one person in Bath, possibly the one person she had ever met, who had been completely honest with her from the very first sentence they exchanged. Not charming, not performing, not saying what the situation seemed to require. Just honest, in the plain and consistent way that is actually very rare, and that most people do not recognize until they have spent time in its presence. She did not say any of this to him that evening, but she thought it, clearly, without any confusion about what it meant. Lord Hargrove never found out. Walter never told him. That is how this story ends. Not with exposure, not with a reckoning, not with the world finally seeing what Cecily saw. Lord Hargrove went on being admired. His hospital wing went on serving families who needed it. And Walter Aldermere went on being Walter Aldermere, quieter than he once was, more careful, with a library that now had 2 desks in use instead of 1, and a ward who was slowly, cautiously, finding her place in a city that had once felt entirely closed to both of them. Some sacrifices are never acknowledged. They do not need to be, to have been worth making. Before this story ends, there are things worth carrying with you. Do not judge a person by the loudest voice in the room. The loudest voice is almost never the most informed one. It is simply the loudest. Bath had decided who Walter was based on a story nobody investigated. Not one person knocked on his door, and asked him directly. They heard, they repeated, they moved on, and a man lost 7 years of his life to a noise he never made. Before you agree with what everyone is saying about someone, stop. Ask yourself who actually looked closely enough to know. Sacrifice is not always visible. Some people are carrying things right now that you will never see. Not because they are hiding it, but because they made a choice that had no audience and expected none. Walter did not carry his silence because he was weak. He carried it because he understood that some things matter more than being understood. The most costly sacrifices in life are the ones nobody ever thanks you for. That does not make them less real. Reputation and character are not the same thing. You can lose one and keep the other. Walter lost his reputation completely. Every dinner invitation, every acknowledgement in the street, every open door gone. But his character, the part of him that made a decision and kept it, that treated a 14-year-old girl as someone worth protecting, that answered Cecily's letter honestly from the first word, that never moved. Which one would you fight harder to protect if you had to choose? The most valuable thing you can give another person is to see them clearly. Not the version of them that rumor built. Not the version that is easiest to believe. The actual person, looked at closely with patience, without rushing to a conclusion. Cecily gave Walter that. It cost her nothing except attention. And it was, in the end, the thing that mattered most to a man who had spent 7 years being looked through rather than looked at. Asking for help when everything in you resists it is not weakness. Walter could have kept Elodie hidden away from the world rather than admit he needed someone else to open doors he could not. He asked anyway. That single act of honesty, "I cannot do this part, will you help me?" was what brought Cecily into that house, which means it was what started everything that followed. Pride protects nothing. Honesty, even when it costs you, moves things forward. Walter Aldermere was not a villain. He was a man who made one decision, quietly, with no audience and no reward, and spent 7 years living inside its consequences. He did not complain. He did not explain himself to people who had already made up their minds. He simply kept going, in the way that people keep going when they have made peace with a choice even if the world has not. And the remarkable thing, the thing that stays with you after this story ends, is that he would make it again, without hesitation, because he understood something that most people only learn too late. Your character is not built in the moments everyone sees. It is built in the ones they do not. If this story made you think, if it reminded you of someone who gave something up so quietly that no one ever noticed, share it with one person today. One person who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, stories from history, from forgotten corners of the world, about people who did extraordinary things in ordinary silence, subscribe to this channel. A new story drops every week. We will be here. In 1820, a real duke, Augustus Frederick, the Duke of Sussex, watched his reputation pulled apart by a society that had already decided who he was before he could speak. He had made choices that polite England did not approve of. He paid for those choices publicly, quietly, and for years. But the deeper inspiration goes further back. In 1806, a young English nobleman named Lord Camelford died after a duel fought partly to defend the honor of someone else. Someone who never publicly acknowledged what he had done for them. He gave everything. Nobody marked it. Nobody thanked him. Those two stories sat in the same corner of history and would not leave. This is why this story was written. Because history is full of people who carried blame they did not earn, who protected others at a cost no one counted, who stayed silent when speaking might have saved them, and did it anyway. Walter Aldermere is fictional, but the choice he made is not. It has been made by real people, in real rooms, in every century. Most of them never got a story told about them at all. This one is for them.